So there's this old story about a man named Roger. And Roger is this kind of rags to riches kind of story. He was born into a household that barely had 2 pennies to rub together. But he worked hard through his life and he built this huge Fortune 500 company. And he lived among the rich. He had every luxury and convenience that was available. And he really pursued and obtained the American dream. And but now Roger's at the end of his life, and he's very grieved and upset because he realizes that he's worked so hard and he's obtained all of this wealth, but he can't take it with him. So he's very upset about this. So he starts praying, and he's like, God, can I please just take some of my wealth with me? I've worked so hard. Can I just take it with me to heaven? Well, an angel hears his cry, and angel comes in to Roger, and he goes, yeah, no, can't take it with you, sorry, And so Roger's like, please, can you talk to God on my behalf? Do you think you can talk him into it? And he's like, not going to happen, dude. And so the angel goes away, and Roger ignores him, and he's like, I'm going to pray even harder. So he starts praying, God, please, I've worked so hard. Well, can I please take this with me? Well, lo and behold, the angel comes back, and he goes, I don't know what you said, but God said he's going to let you bring one suitcase to heaven. Roger is ecstatic. So he goes and finds the biggest suitcase he can find, and he fills it with solid gold bars. Puts it right next to his bed. Soon enough, Roger dies, and he's wheeling up there with his suitcase up to the pearly gates, and St. Peter's sitting there, and St. Peter goes, whoa, you can't take that. And he goes, no, I have permission. And he's like, I prayed, and the angel said that I could bring one suitcase. He's like, will you please just go check with the Lord? He told me I could. St. Peter's like, all right. So St. Peter comes back, and he's like, all right, you're right. You can take one suitcase. He's like, but I have to inspect it before it's allowed in. So he says, okay, and he hands him the suitcase, and St. Peter opens it, and he needs to inspect all of these worldly items that were just too precious to be left behind. So he opens it, and he goes, you brought pavement? I think that story speaks volumes about our possessions and our wealth. This man lived what most people would agree would be a desirable life. But I can't help but think that something was amiss in his request to want to bring his earthly treasures with him to heaven. What really was his motivation? And why did he want to do that? And what did that say about his heart? We can clearly see this man had a problem with materialism. We often tend to think that materialism is just something that the super rich have to deal with. And maybe they do, but you don't have to own a yacht. You don't have to have a Beverly Hills mansion or a beach house to struggle with materialism. We as a society and a culture have been ingrained to think and behave according to what it is that this life can give us. And we no longer can even see it anymore because it's just such a part of normal life, especially American culture. It isn't something that you get when you reach a certain tax bracket all of a sudden, oh, you're a materialist now. It starts kind of small and innocently. Comments like, I just want my kids to have a better life than I had growing up. I don't want them to go without. Or, if I just work hard enough and I go to college, I can get a good job making this amount of money and I'll have a good life. Or, if I just made a little more money, things would be so much better. What about, I need to invest well and make sure I have plenty of money to live on when I retire so that I can kick back and travel or do whatever I want in my senior years. None of these comments are bad, but they all are tainted with materialism. This is why I'm convinced that many, if not all of us to some extent, are walking around with cases of materialism. And frankly, if there was a way to make materialism visible by an external appearance, it would be glaringly obvious. Kind of like Pinocchio. If, like Pinocchio's nose, our nose grew according to the level of materialism in our hearts and our life, we'd all be walking around with oak trees growing out of the center of our face. It reminds me of a woman that came in to see me for a bump on her nose. She came in and said, I have this bump, can you look at it? I need, something to make it go away. Okay. So she had worn a lot of makeup that day, so I cleaned layers and layers of makeup off this woman. And what I found after removing all of that makeup was not a bump, but a hole the size of a pea in the center of her nose. I told her she had skin cancer. And she was in denial. She's like, no way. She's like, I don't believe it. I mean, despite the fact that this was literally eating her nose, she could not accept that she had cancer. She kept saying, but I feel fine. It's just a pimple. It's no big deal. Just give me an antibiotic and a cream. I'm sure it'll go away. She's like, I don't have any symptoms. She's like, I know people who have cancer, and, I am not losing weight. I, haven't lost my hair. I feel just the same as I did before I got this as I do now. It can't be cancer. It wasn't until I sent her to a dermatologist and they did a biopsy and they looked at those cells under the microscope and agreed that, yes, indeed, she does have skin cancer, that she finally accepted the diagnosis. However, the disease of materialism is just as easily rationalized, justified, and ignored as a problem. We could be walking around with it on our nose and say, oh, it's just a pimple. It's no big deal. We think, well, I don't live like so-and-so, or I don't own X, Y, and Z over here, so I don't have materialism. I'm not like that song, Material Girl. But until we put our lives under the microscope, so to speak, to analyze what materialism is and where might it be lurking, we continue to think we don't have this as a problem. Let me put it more plainly. If you live in America, you have a problem with materialism. If you are bent towards sin, you have a problem with materialism. It doesn't matter how many possessions you have, how much money you have or don't have in the bank, or where you are compared to your peers. Every single one of us struggles with materialism. I challenge you this morning to search your heart. It's not a matter of if I struggle with materialism, it's where is it seeping into my heart and controlling my life. Turn with me, if you will, to Matthew chapter 6. We're going to read from verse 19 through 21. Jesus is talking here. He's giving the Sermon on the Mount. And he starts talking about treasure. So in verse 19 he says, do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moths and vermin destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And we can see here in Matthew that our problem is not the treasure themselves. Jesus is speaking here about two treasures, earthly and heavenly. I mean, that's pretty simple, right? He says there's treasures on here and there's treasures on earth. One is temporary, doesn't last, can easily be destroyed. One is permanent. Jesus says that one treasure is, Jesus does not say that one treasure is evil and one treasure is not. He doesn't say don't store up treasure, any treasure. He doesn't say don't save money. He doesn't say you can't have nice things. He doesn't say money is evil. But what he does say is don't store up earthly treasures for yourself. Why? Well, he tells us why in verse 21. He tells us that our heart and our treasures are directly linked. When Jesus says don't store up, He's talking about this mindset of accumulating and needing more and more for our own personal gain and elevation in our perceived status in the world. When we store up earthly possessions, money or material wealth, we put value on things. It's like someone handed you the price sticker at the store, and we start saying, oh, this is worth this much, and this is worth this much, and oh, that's worth that much. Oh, that's even worth more. I'm going to put more on that one. And with each item that we place value on, our hearts start to attach itself to that thing. Materialism is then born out of putting values on earthly possessions and then believing that we need to accumulate and store up more and more and more to be fulfilled. We get it backwards, Jesus says. And we start believing that money and wealth of this world is more valuable than the things of God. And our hearts follow what we have put the highest price on. When we do that, we become materialists. So you see, materialism at its core is not about how much stuff you have or your level of wealth. It's not about the math. It's about our hearts. Materialism is the lie we believe that our path to peace or to happiness or to freedom or to fulfillment is through money and what money can buy. It causes us to place the utmost value on things that are temporary. And our hearts act like the tentacles of an octopus as we wrap our hearts around these things and become so entangled that it becomes so much a part of us that we don't even recognize it. Not only that it's there, but how much effect it is having on our lives. Jesus tells us this in Matthew as a way to hold up the mirror on our lives so we can see what we're holding on to. Grabbing onto it so tight and it's so close, we can't even see it. And Jesus is just holding up that mirror saying, just look. Just look. Jesus also tells us that there's another option. That we can live rich forever with Him when we pursue heavenly treasure and leave materialism behind. Materialism can manifest in many different ways, but it's always about me. What makes me happy? What makes me feel good? What makes me feel secure? Gives me identity, makes me feel important. These things are all temporary and fleeting, and yet we put the highest value on them because of how it makes me feel. Materialism is a defective belief about money. Have you ever bought something online or at the store and then you had to return it because it was broken? I bought a TV for my husband a couple years ago, and I went to pick it up at the store. I even had to borrow a friend's car because my car at the time was not big enough to tote this TV. And I was so excited. I wasn't, I'm not handy enough to be able to just hang it on the wall for him. So I did bring it home, and I had it waiting in the bedroom, and I was so excited. And he comes home, and he's like, oh, yeah, let's take it out of the box. And when, it was one of those ones that, fit, right on the wall. And we got the brackets out, we got everything leveled, and we hung the TV up, and I went up and hit the power button, and it says, welcome to your new Samsung. And that's all it said. It never did anything else. It was defective. It was broken. It was never going to work. The mindset of materialism is the same. It's a defective way of thinking about money. It doesn't work, and it never will. We need to exchange that mindset of materialism for a mindset that actually delivers on its promises, for something that actually works and actually fulfills that need that we have in our hearts. But we have to recognize it in our life. One way materialism manifests is, if I only had blank, I will finally be happy. I don't know about you, but I have said that more than once. If if I only had, then I would be content. Sometimes this starts from comparison. We see what someone else has and we think, if I could just have that, I'd be happy. I'd be content. Even simple things, if I could just have those shoes, I'd be happy. Or even bigger things, if I could just, get to that point where I could buy that house in that neighborhood, or if I could drive this particular car, and or if I could just go on some vacations, I would be happy. I would be content. Trust me, I've been there. I could lead the parade on some of these sometimes. When I was in high school, there were these Nikes that everybody had, and everybody had their own color. And my parents didn't have the money to buy $150 Nikes, and but I wanted them so bad. So bad. I would just lay in bed and think, man, if I could just have those shoes, I would be like everybody else, and maybe I would just fit in and I'd be happy. It starts small. Then we get our first job and we buy things that we want, and it makes us feel good. And then we get the approval from our friends, things like, hey, where'd you get that bag? That's so cool. I want one. No way, you were able to get that phone? And then boosts our ego, and our desire for more stuff grows and grows. We need that feel-good feeling again, where people are like, oh, they noticed me. And then the older we get a real job, and we have to pay bills, paying rent and a car payment. And we have a little extra and we think, I think I'm going to go buy that laptop or that car, or maybe I'll go on that cruise that I've been wanting to go on. And we do it because I've worked hard and I deserve it. And then we orchestrate our lives to work towards obtaining this treasure, and we get to the point where we start spending all of our time either working towards it and obtaining it, or if we get it, then we're trying not to lose it and we're worried about it all the time. We spend hours, like if we get a new car that we have just pined over for months and months, then we get it and we spend hours washing it every other day, trying to keep it just as clean as it was the day that we got it. And then we park our car way out in the end so we don't get that dreaded door ding. Heaven forbid. Our treasures become all we think about and all we talk about. We obsess over them. We think about them constantly. They determine our choices in life. They even determine where we park. We constantly are checking our investment portfolios, and our emotions, they go up and down with the fickleness and just that vacillation of the stock market. The things we think about often when we search up online when our free time is things that we're pining after. It is this slow, insidious process, but before we know it, our material, earthly possessions become exactly the objects of our desire, and it's all we can focus on. My mom used to tell me when I found something in a store that was overpriced and I really liked it and I really wanted it, she would say, oh, just walk away. By the time you get home, you'll have forgotten about it. I found that not to be true for me. Maybe it was for her. I would think about it. And I would constantly try to justify in my head 5 different ways as to why I needed it and how I could get my money out of it, even though it was like way overpriced. I would then try to manipulate my bank account to be able to buy it, or even worse, I would just put it on a credit card. You get to this point when you realize if you are obsessing over it like that, you can be sure that materialism has found its way into your heart. And the desires, they just keep growing. With each new thing or new experience, we want more and more. No amount of possessions, no number in the bank account, no level of wealth, no number in the investment accounts is ever going to be enough. It's not a math problem. These things become what we worship. Another thing to consider and to think about is because this is a heart issue, you really don't even have to accumulate any earthly treasures to have materialism. You can even actively deny yourself those things. But if you still are harboring those desires in your heart, and you're thinking about it and you're becoming bitter that I don't have it, you have just as much of a problem with materialism as the person that's buying and storing things up. Let me just remind everyone that this is for everyone. We are all living in this consumer-driven culture. It's all around us. It's everywhere. Even some of your most basic essentials in life, like soap. It's not a new thing. At least I don't think it is for anybody in here. But these marketers, they tell us that the soap, it's going to make your skin glow. It'll invigorate you. It'll make you a whole new person. Even men's soap commercials, they'll say it'll make you more manly if you use my soap. What does that even mean? But I mean, at the end of the day, it's just still soap, right? But these marketers, they use techniques that speak deeper to deeper things that we want and desire. And they suggest in their ads that their products will fulfill those desires. Just buy our products. Buy our soap. It'll make you feel this way. Last time I checked, it just makes you clean. But another way materialism manifests is making us feel important, giving us status or identity. This life in this world can offer us things that give us this feeling of I have made it. I am somebody. I think of walking into South Park Mall in Charlotte. And I can think there was a moment in my life that I walked in there and I said, I can buy anything I want in here and be just like the people that shop here. Now, if you've never been to South Park Mall in Charlotte, it is still thriving despite the recent downturn in malls. It has almost every luxury and designer brand you can think of and the price tag to match. The parking lot looks like a luxury car dealership, and people just dress to the nines just to go shopping there. Truthfully, the things sold in that mall are all still metals and leathers and cloth, but they come with a logo that says, I am somebody. And this is probably what a lot of us think about when we think about materialism. Somebody who is selfish, self-reliant, concerned about what other people think. But what other statuses or identities are created because of a certain possession or wealth? What about your family station? If God had you born into a poor family in Africa and you still grew up a Christian, would you still feel blessed as you do now? You know, we can put a lot of value on our family and who our family is and feel a sense of entitlement as a result. Our occupation, our jobs, degrees, or other things that we put high values on like that, but would you still feel as blessed if you were a gas station clerk? What about the car you drive? Does that give you a level of status? Would you feel just as blessed if you drove an old minivan? What about our bank accounts? Would you still feel blessed if your retirement account had a drop in the market and it caused you to take a serious loss? Anything that can cause our hearts to grab onto them and say, this is more important than my relationship with God and doing what God has called me to do is wrong. The tentacles of materialism even extend into valuing and pursuing things as conveniences, experiences, beauty. I mean, there are millions of different services out there and products that keep us looking young. Anything from surgery to Botox to fancy face creams to laser procedures, the list just goes on. And none of those things are evil or bad. But the point is, if having that youthful glow is the most valuable thing to you, and if it's what motivates you, then your heart has followed it, knowingly or not. The ugly side of materialism leads to selfishness, greed, and pride. And then as it continues down that road, it leads to anxiety and depression and emptiness and despair. Even though earthly treasures promise fulfillment, they will never satisfy. But if we're to overcome materialism, it requires an examination of our hearts. No external actions that we do can cure our hearts of the disease of materialism. It takes consistent and repeated evaluations of our motives, our desires, to eliminate materialism in our hearts. No amount of giving or generosity is going to cure your heart from the grasp of materialism. If you give and you're still bound by materialism, you're either going to become bitter or proud. Bitter that you can't get what your heart's desire because you feel obligated to give, or you're going to feel proud because I can give and I can still get what I want. Both are still tied to materialism. Doesn't matter how much you give. It's not something that we have to evaluate once and then rid ourselves of. It's not a cure. It's a treatment. That's what I tell some of my patients. Like diabetes, there's no cure for it, but I can treat it. Something you have to constantly be vigilant at and work at. Materialism is something that will always be at our door, waiting to tell you its lies again to move back into your hearts. Think about your heart this way. What happens to a bucket of water on a cold day? Maybe not here, maybe somewhere farther north. It freezes. So it is with our hearts. Our hearts have to be constantly stirred. Otherwise, they freeze over just like the bucket of water. We have to be constantly vigilant against the lies of this world. Jesus wishes for us to have a life that is full and without the constant need for more and more. He wants us to rely on him and find our motivations and purposes that he has for us. In order for us to experience healing and freedom from our toxic relationship with money, because that's really what it is, it's a toxic relationship, we need to learn how to have a healthy relationship with money. It's this part of learning and growing in Christ. It's not something that we talk about much, but Jesus talked about money often. 16 of his 38 parables, at least, were about money. If it was important for Jesus to talk about it, then it's important for us to talk about it too. We're offering Financial Peace University starting next week, a week from today. It is shame-free, judgment-free chance for all of us to find healing and freedom with our money. Jesus wants this for us, to live and structure our financial lives in such a way that not only that it glorifies him, but also it gives us the margin and the opportunity to better live out our purposes that he has for us. It's for all of us. No matter how much money you make, no matter what you own, what your assets are, this is for all of us. We all could do better and learn how to steward our money better. If we can do this and orient our minds and hearts in a way to view money and to spend money and to save money properly, Jesus says that our best life lived is when we care more about accumulating treasure in heaven than here on earth. Jesus tells us to store our treasures in heaven. Heaven's treasures are permanent. They don't rust, they don't corrode or fade away, they can't be lost or stolen. If we're pursuing and storing eternal treasure, our heart follows. Our hearts are then not plagued by materialism. It's no longer worried about the level of money in our bank account. It's not concerned about what our friend drives or where our friends go on vacation. Earthly status no longer matters because our heavenly status is more important. Randy Alcorn's book, Money, Possessions, and Eternity, suggests that based on this passage, what we give and share and do in Christ's name will ultimately come back to us in heaven in permanent form. I mean, think about it. We can trade temporary possessions that we can't keep and take them with us to gain eternal possessions we can't lose. We trade them in. We can't take anything that we accumulate here on earth with us. Not even a suitcase full of pavement. Jesus is giving us insider information, if you will, on how to invest in our permanent home by redirecting our hearts towards the things of God instead of the things of this world and storing up riches for ourselves in heaven. This is a reason Jesus said it's harder for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than it is for a rich man to enter heaven. Because these earthly treasures entrap our hearts. Just like the octopus that's wrapping itself around something. We are just entrapped. We can't see heaven's riches if we're focusing on the glitter of fool's gold. Jesus is telling us that the riches of this life is just pavement compared to what awaits you in heaven. Don't fall for the lie. This is not a way that we normally think. Sometimes we even have a hard time thinking about how do we plan for retirement? How do I save for the future, let alone storing up things in heaven? That's even farther down the road. But Jesus is telling us to live our lives in a way that we take that selfish desire to accumulate stuff for ourselves and redirect it from earthly wealth to a permanent, eternal wealth. Jesus doesn't give us a formula for a prosperous and wealthy life, but he promises us heavenly treasure. But this side of eternity, just because you're a follower of Jesus, does not mean you will never have to worry about anything. It doesn't mean you won't lose your home or lose your possessions or be in financial trouble at some point. But it does change the way that we view our earthly possessions. There's a story about John Wesley. He says one day there was a man that came running up to John Wesley, and he said, "Mr. Wesley, your house just burned down." To which John replied, "No, it hasn't. The house I've been living in belongs to the Lord. If it burned down, then that's one less responsibility that I have to worry about." When we view our earthly possessions rightly, we don't have such firm grips on them. We realize whose they are. In order to see things rightly, we have to stop seeing materialism as anything but just stupid. I don't let my kids say that, so, that word, but I couldn't think of another word that fit, so. It's stupid to hoard treasures here on earth where there is an expiration date. You can't take it with you. How many times have we heard there's no U-Haul attached to the hearse, right? It's not going anywhere. It stays here. Jesus is telling you to send your treasures on ahead, and the exchange rate is better than any other. So how do you store up treasure in heaven? You live according to his will. You recognize that each of us has a calling on our hearts to have a relationship with our Creator. And he is calling you to help other people find and follow Jesus, so that then they can go help other people find and follow Jesus, so that they then can go help find and follow Jesus. It just keeps going. But our purpose starts with that relationship and then going and telling others about it. Giving generously from a heart of thanksgiving and not obligation. The treasure that will trade up in heaven is 1,000 times better than pavement. Finally, we live rich when we live for God. Back in Matthew chapter 6, we're going to read on the next two verses. Verse 22 through 24. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. When he's talking about the eye, he's referring to our souls. When our soul is filled with light, our body is healthy. But when our souls are filled with darkness, so are our bodies. What he's saying is, what he's getting at is that it's what's inside that matters. It's not what's on the outside around us that gives us light and fulfillment. He then goes on to say we must choose. There's an ultimatum. Love God or love money. You can't love money and love God. Even if you try, you're going to end up loving one and hating the other. He says that. These two things they're mutually exclusive. Tim Keller puts it this way. He says, Jesus is saying here, unless you have me, you are not really rich, because I am the only currency that cannot be devalued. Unless you have me, you will never be successful, because I am the only status you can never lose. 2 Corinthians 8:9 says, you know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, so that by his poverty he could make you rich. So because Jesus left the riches of heaven, Jesus left everything. He had status, he had riches, he had all the honor, all the beauty, all the wealth. He had everything. And he came here to earth. Why? There must have been something he treasured so much that he was willing to leave it behind. He was born in a manger, a feeding trough for animals. His parents offered the lowest sacrifice at his circumcision. He lived homeless. He only had one garment. He had one possession. He died a criminal's death, and then he was buried in a borrowed tomb. Jesus came from everything, and he came down here, and he was poor. He left all of his treasures behind. Why? For us. We are his treasure. And because he did that, we now get the opportunity to make him our treasure for all eternity, filled with unending joy and satisfaction. That is the rich that we get to live for, to be fulfilled and full of joy. This series is all about the invitation from God to live rich by living for the treasures of heaven. Every week for the next 3 weeks, we're going to discover the beautiful promise that we get to live rich because of Jesus. And it starts today with Jesus' ultimatum. Love me or love money. You know, everything we have will someday pass away. Think about all the things you have. Your car. Someday someone else is going to drive that car. Your clothes. All your possessions will eventually get old or broken or someone else's. Your house. Someone else will eventually live in your house. Nothing here on earth lasts. But Jesus is offering us something that is so valuable, and it never gets old. It never gets devalued. He offers us himself, and he wants us to treasure him just as he left his throne of heaven because he treasured us.